Welcome to The Outer Circle, Inner Stillness. Reflections and conversations exploring recovery work and spiritual disciplines and where they come together. The Outer Circle comes from a recovery exercise called the 3 circles. The middle circle contains the bottom line behaviors, those destructive patterns you are working to avoid. The second circle contains those behaviors, patterns, places, and relationships that, while not inherently bad, for you are an integral part of the spiral towards the middle circle. The outer circle contains the vision of your best and fullest self that you are seeking to live. Turning towards this full self is turning away from your middle circle. The outer circle explores daily practices that promote sobriety, presence, balance, connection, thriving, purpose, healing, and resilience. Inner stillness is a concept from Orthodox Christian spiritual thought that refers to the deepest part of a person's soul, the place where God lives and speaks. In pursuing the outer circle and the inner stillness, I believe we can find all that we need. Welcome to the Outer Circle, Inner Stillness, conversations and reflections on the integration of the spiritual life and the sober life and the inner life. And wouldn't you know it, they all have a lot to do with each other. My name is Rhys Pasimio.
My name's Ben.
And we're your hosts for the day, talking about how people grow and change and heal, which I didn't quite want to introduce it that way because I think that's a Cloud and Townsend book, and we're not talking about that. But we did.
I thought that was Boundaries.
That one too. Also the safe people. They get around. In our dialogue, we had come into this question, I think, of how to help people grow and change, especially in regards to like a recovery context. So that's kind of the direction we're going today. But what I'd love to do for the listeners who do not listen to the Lotus Spirits, where we met, Ben, could you introduce yourself and say a little bit about what's your connection to the inner life, the recovery life, the Orthodox life?
Yeah, so my name's Ben, and I'm currently on staff at a homeless shelter in northern Indiana, and I've been here about 3 years, and so you'd mentioned the Lord of Spirits podcast, so I guess I can start there on how we kind of connected. So I'd called in a question asking about extending catechism beyond the church. So like for those of us who maybe have more direct opportunities to intentionally invest in the hearts and lives of the people where we're at, how can we extend that and apply maybe some of the, I don't know if principles is the word I want to use, but kind of the idea of how are we forming people? And specifically in my context, it's like, how am I forming the homeless? And so I'd really feel like I've kind of honed in on this idea that chaos and brokenness atrophies our capacity for self-responsibility in our web of relationships. And when our capacity for self-responsibility in our web of relationships atrophies below like a certain level, we become homeless. And so I kind of plugged that in my question. And then later on, I actually don't have social media. So I was using my wife's Facebook to just because I try to follow like what's happening in that group. And noticed that you'd reached out, and so that's kind of how we got connected. But I was really actually recently baptized, so that was why catechism was. That question was, I don't know, almost a year old that I'd sent into the speak pipe. So was baptized Lazarus Saturday. So I don't know how many months ago that is, but recent convert to Orthodoxy, but
3 or 4 months, I think. Yeah,
was raised within Christianity, kind of broader Christianity, essentially my whole life. So I've been moving in the direction of hopefully Christ for at least since college is when I started to really kind of be serious about that, and was really impacted, particularly by Richard Foster's Celebration of Discipline. So like some of the stuff that I read early on kind of, I think, prepared me for Orthodoxy, but it wasn't until I guess this year that we were finally actually received into the church. So it was a bit of a mystery, but here I am. So in my role at the homeless shelter now, I'm what we call a vocational coordinator. So I specifically kind of partner with the participants that we have there to kind of provide them with a live pre-employment work environment to gain job skills, but also ideally to provide them with a context to apply the stuff that they're doing in programming so that they have an opportunity to discover those character opportunities or the areas of brokenness in their lives that have handicapped their ability to maintain when they're not staying at the shelter. So it's, someone's going on smoke breaks early or doing some of these things are like unable to take feedback. Like that's a big one. Like if your boss says, hey, like I don't like the way that you fold these pants, and then you go and pop a bunch of bubble wrap or I think I'd shared that story one time that had someone who had no idea her arm hurt, was throwing clothes in a baler. So she just walked off and started popping bubble wrap, which we used to like ship things. So now she's like destroying company property, and just how quickly like this could really get framed one way. But we try to be a community to wrap around the participants, like address like, hey, this is how this would get interpreted outside of here. We don't want that future for you. Like, how can we kind of help you move in a different, identify this sooner, advocate for yourself, communicate so that it doesn't kind of get to this point here. So yeah, that's kind of what my current role is.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. And as I'm hearing again your background and some of what you brought in, what drew me to like your question and prompted me reaching out is you're talking about this question: how do we form people or help people in the formation? And there's a question around spiritual formation. There's a question around recovery work, and hearing you talk about the challenges faced by people coming out of extreme chaos and homelessness into something like order, something like a housed life. It's a different way of life, and it's a different skill set, different set of reflexes that one needs to sustain housing, to sustain employment, connections in housing, than it is to sustain survival on the streets. And so I think one of the things that intrigued me was this idea of, well, how do you invite someone from one way of life into another? That resonated with me because there's a way I do a different version of that work when I do addictions counseling. And I'm inviting, in my case, mostly men, but inviting people from the way of life that's marked by acting out, acting in, chaos, unmanageability, compulsion, loss of control, lots of drugs, lots of sex and pornography, and lots of extreme behaviors, into a way of life marked by presence, by order, by connection, by balance. And that's been a question that's come up a lot in my men's groups is, how do I know that I'm sober enough? Or, okay, so I quit using, but now what? And is that all that there is? And so it's raised questions for me around, well, what is a sober way of life? And then, well, actually, it was raising questions about like, how do you tell if you're sober enough already? And then I read, audiobooked Dr. Constantina's book, Thinking Orthodox. And she introduced me to this concept of phronema. And that's going to be my token Greek word for the day. But and if you understand the word a little better than I do, feel free to throw it in.
No, the book's next on my list because you recommended the book, so it's next on my list, but I haven't got to it yet. So you're the Greek scholar today.
Awesome. That's kind of scary. Anyways, but when she's talking about phronema, she specifically compares and contrasts Orthodox Christian, Catholic, and Protestant phronema as way of life, as this whole person's set of like beliefs and assumptions and practices and mindsets, words and speech that make up how a person lives. And so that's been a question on my mind is like, well, not just like how do Orthodox people live, but how do sober people live? And in my head, I made a connection between you and me, Ben, and saying, so you're helping people on the streets learn how do housed people live and what all goes into that and everything.
Yeah. Honestly, sober is almost 70% of the question though, really, with a lot of the men and women that we serve. But what's tricky is that it generally gets framed as like success, it took me a really long time to understand why I kind of, I'd see people come through, they'd be called out or like, these are the success stories or the whatever. And then, we do a big piece on them and we're celebrating them or what. And then 3 months later, 4 months later, they're back. And it's like, was that a success? So like it was tricky because it seemed to be that like success or sober enough was being kind of framed as like that's what it took. And that really it was really kind of confusing for a long time, because if someone's just pursuing sober, right, then it's just like, okay, then what more is there beyond self-care? What is it, like you were saying, like what is sober enough? Like, can I drink once a week? Can I, snort something twice a week? Like, is functioning addict successful enough? Like, is it just that I have a house that I'm successful enough? Like, so reframing even the question, because what's really tough working in the context that I'm at, we used to do like chapel services every night, and just about every night people were coming in and saying like, you're homeless or you have these problems because you're not a Christian. And it's like, I know these people, and like they know the Bible better than you. Like, like I had purple hair one time, and one of the guys there, just out of nowhere, he's like, I saw your purple hair and it took me a while, but like the Bible talks about purple hair, and turns out like Song of Songs, like 4:3 or something random like that, just talks about like the purple hair. And I was like, like I had no idea that purple hair is in scripture. And so it wasn't necessarily that they weren't homeless because they weren't Christians. It was because of the chaos and the brokenness. And so it was like, all right, how can I help somebody who's like living with chaos and brokenness rediscover their capacity to be self-responsible, their web of relationships? And so for me, what kind of made the most sense from scripture was talking, when Paul talks about that Christ is the chief cornerstone, and that he's, and Christ says that he is life. Like, how can we orient someone towards life, which is Christ? Like that, like if I'm empowering someone to move in the direction of life, like sobriety is like happens. Like if you're moving in a healthy, like in the direction of life, like you're not going to do things that compromise your capacity for life, which includes like your sobriety. Like if you're perpetually not sober, like you can't exactly live life. And so like, he talks also about like faithfulness, hope, and love remain. And so like, how am I empowering someone to like rediscover hope? And when they have like hope that life is possible, all right, so like expressions of faithfulness to hope are like, one, it's self-responsibility. Like that's what you're doing if you're continue to be faithful towards this idea of life. But then also like that's generally like the doing of the things is love. And so that seemed to kind of fit as a grid, because now like somebody who's kind of comes back, like they can kind of, it doesn't have to be like this linear thing. Like they can come back and then it's like, all right, they've launched, they come back. It's like, okay, we've got this. Now we can kind of address this. And then like kind of maintain these like healthier life cycles for longer, like seem to be a more helpful lens for empowering the men and women that we're serving than like kind of, because like honestly, like we had a guy a couple months ago who died by suicide because he couldn't be successful like at sobriety. Like he killed him, like he killed himself, and it was really crushing. But like I'm obviously I'm not trying to blame anybody about it, but like I think I'm pretty convinced that part of like, because in the conversations I had with him, he's just like, I just can't get sober. Like I can't like be successfully sober. And so it was like, that hurt. That one hurt.
Yeah, that hurts a lot. And I think we can rightly point to some problematic mindsets that are in there. Like you raised like the problem of success. And we could say, yeah, the problem with success is that is usually limited to abstinence or maybe to just behavior change in general. And so I'm imagining this fellow, Lord have mercy on his soul, the only rubric for success he's given is sustained abstinence from everything and forever. That's really hard. That's really hard to do. It's hard to do all at once. Most people take a lot of times to really succeed in abstaining. But the thing with abstinence, it's a subtractive goal and it's incomplete on its own. So you're talking about it's not enough. It's not sober enough to just stop. And then you get like referencing these folks who are like, well, can I drink once in a while? Can I smoke once in a while? The other dynamic is like, well, let's say I want to quit things altogether. So I've quit alcohol. Now I'll quit drugs. Now I'll quit porn. What else can I quit? I'll quit like the internet. I'll quit TV. I'll quit Star Trek. I'll become vegan, things like that. And at some point, there's no more things left to quit. And all of your energy is going into maintaining the quitness. And that's not the same as character growth. It's not the same as introspection. It's not the same as healing. And it's not the same necessarily as pursuing anything. And that's the thing that needs to be present to complete this all, is you need to be pursuing something. And that's the uniquely wonderful, rich offering of faith in the Orthodox faith, is we are given this thing to pursue conformity to the image of Christ, and to pursue union with him, and to pursue the life of the church. We have something really beautiful we can step into, that we're adding into our life. And that can make it really complete. A lot of people are missing that, and that makes it really hard. But yeah, the measure of success needs to be a little bit more sophisticated than just don't do drugs.
Yeah, exactly. And that's I found opportunities to have that specific conversation. Like, there's a guy that we just launched recently who, when he was coming out, he's like, I just want to be happy. And I was like, okay, like, let's think about this. Like, is that really going to be kind of a sustainable long-term goal? Is like happiness? Like, I was like, so tell me, how do you happy? Like, can you happy for me right now? Like, what does that even mean? And he didn't have an answer. And it's kind of an unfair question, I guess, but happiness is like, again, like I'm talking about. So
because happiness doesn't exist.
Yeah, that it's a byproduct of something else. Like, happiness is a byproduct of like kind of moving in a certain direction, and like that experiencing it like coming true or manifesting. And so I kind of had that opportunity to talk to him about that. And then also about like, in his sobriety, like, it's like, listen, like, it's the same with sobriety. Like, if you're not moving towards something higher than sobriety, like, it's not going to be sustainable. If sobriety is like the only goal, like you said, it's kind of like the quitness, not what you like this, the negative route. I'm not like in a pejorative sense, but like there's the taking things away kind of thing, which is necessary in order to rediscover a capacity for self-responsibility and even yourself, right? Like, one of the interesting things about sobriety is like, oh yeah, that's who I am. That's been one of the fun things in my context, is people coming and learning how to work sober for possibly even the first time in their life. It's like, wow, like I actually like enjoy working or doing these things. And then having an opportunity to discover what is it about life that they want to move towards. Because generally, if they've hit rock bottom, it's like, oh, I don't want to die. But basically kind of scraping by for so long, there's like almost an inability to answer the question, what's the best that could happen? And like, then move in that direction, like, which is what we're trying to kind of help someone do.
Yeah. It's watching the stage progression in the sobriety world from like, my motivation is I don't want to die, to, now my motivation is like, hey, I'd like to like kind of enjoy life. I'd like to happy. And so maybe beyond that, the sense of like, I want to like contribute to the world, and I want to like be present with the people around me. And I'm thinking like the correlate in the church, there can be that more primal motivation of like, I just don't want to go to hell. And which, I mean, insert theological points about the problems with that statement. But, there's that initial fear of consequences. And then there's this more sense of like, yeah, I want to go to heaven. I want to reap the spiritual blessings in it and everything. And then the more robust motivation of like, I love the Lord Jesus and I don't want to grieve him. And I would be afraid to do that. And that's actually Abba Dorotheos will talk about that when he's talking about levels of love, or he's talking about fear of love. But he's the one that I learned this progression from, is that there's you seek righteousness. Oh my goodness, I'm butchering Abba Dorotheos. Lord forgive me. But there's this initial motivation of like, I just want to avoid consequences. And then there's this more sophisticated motivation that's I want to gain blessings. And then there's like the most sophisticated motivation. That's really driven by love. Like I love this person. I love the Lord so deeply that my fear is to grieve this person through my actions. And it's not a fear of punishment. It's a fear of damaging the relationship. And in order for that to happen, there has to be a relationship in place. So I guess we could say a good growth arc in any context would be into more relationship, I love like the way you talk about like the web of relationships, because one relationship gets kind of old after a while, but having a bunch keeps things lively.
Yeah, that really, it's fascinating how important that is. Or at least for me, I was homeschooled, and so like there's a bit of kind of this insular thing. It's like it's just us. So like how important it really is, like so like we get people connected with mental health services, with our local housing authority, with the hospital staffs, nurses, and our shelter, so that like to really kind of attend to, like, we're next door to a dental clinic, and really trying to holistically attend to kind of all of those needs takes a community that like one of the first things that we kind of even see with somebody, at least on the streets, right? If they're holding a sign, they're by themselves, and like it's like, oh, we'll go get a job or something like that. It's like, well, I can't get a job. And it's like, well, like if someone's dropped out of the community, they're actually barriers to like reentry into the community. Like one of the ironic things that is that you have to have a legally established place to exist in order to get the legal like the documents to even be allowed to legally work. So it's almost like, go get a job. It's like, all right, should I work illegally? Or like, what do you mean when you say go get a job? Like, because I actually don't have those documents. Like everything's like literally it's just all gone, right? So like we provide people with a letter of residency and an affidavit so that they can go to our BMV and get an ID. And then they can use the ID to get a birth certificate. And that takes like a month minimum. And it's like, all right, so like, how are you supposed to stay alive that long without, so we provide 3 meals a day, totally free every day. Like we provide a place to sleep that's safe, like, so like the amount of things that are necessary for that. But it's like, this is what we focus on. Like we need these other partners in the community. Like we need people who can like provide them with employment or like bridge employment opportunities, which is, why we do the vocational stuff. Like, all right, what job skills do you have? Like, how can we kind of empower you to like start working again? Or, because like that even brings order into someone's life, like practicing, like doing these things. And again, like it's forming someone. Like these are the things that are necessary to like sustain or to participate in society. But we all kind of have these different elements that we're able to bring. And I think because it's honestly, it's overwhelming, like trying to answer like, okay, how can I help? Because the whole question, like, go change yourself, saying that to like this person on the street corner who's alone and doesn't have like a community, because like if they had relationships, they wouldn't be standing on the corner. Like it's kind of almost
probably not
forgotten. And where was I going with that? But like it's necessary to have these other connection points, because like, just because someone doesn't get on well with me, like they might get on well with their case manager, somebody else who's able to have like the conversation that unlocks like, oh, this is the real root cause of this person's brokenness or their barrier. Like, because the trick with chaos, right? It's these things that come in that it seem meaningless, right? But if someone has life as an orientation, they're able to assign meaning to the chaotic stuff and to the brokenness. They can either see it as this, all right, game over, like whatever, I'm just going to go get hired. I'm just going to go drink. I'm just going to go whatever the addictive or destructive behavior is that this person is formally engaged with, right? It's how do we have enough supports so that the person doesn't think that, well, that's my only solution to dealing with this. And I can't do it alone. I can't help all of that. And that's humbling, but
yeah. So, I mean, getting back to this question of how do we form people, or or like how do we invite people into a different way of life? And just hearing how you're describing it, it's a big transition. We can maybe even say like a really violent transition from like chaos to order. A lot of things get disrupted, things get lost, and there needs to be a lot of bracketing, a lot of support structures around that. It's even without the homelessness piece, somebody's going from a life of sobriety, so I'm thinking, say you're given individual who's like acting out sexually, lots of porn, lots of affairs, lots of hookups, lots of secrecy, lots of money spent. When all of that comes out, it's hugely disruptive to the family. Sometimes they lose the family. They might have to go to inpatient. They might lose their job, and like a whole lot of things change. The end result can be really great: stability, order, a connection, a lot of insight. But that initial process needs a lot of support because it's hard. It's hard to go against the nature that has been developed for your whole life. Like you can't just do it on cue because it didn't just develop overnight. It's your whole life there. I wonder if we could pause a little bit on some of these traps that we fall into in trying to facilitate this forming and invitation process, because it seems like sometimes it doesn't work. I know for me, as we're thinking about that's how do I invite someone into a different way of life, I think one trap we could fall into would be like the educational trap. So certainly some education, some learning should happen, but the trap would be to look at growth and change as strictly an intellectual pursuit, or making the assumption, well, if I just equip this person with enough data or enough facts or enough skills, then they'll be fine. Which those aren't bad things, and sure, we need those out there. But when we're talking about a whole life transformation, it's much more than just data. And I would say this goes for catechism too. Like, yes, we learn about the creed, we learn about the prayers, we learn about like our core doctrines and theologies. But as we're learning all of that and hopefully retaining some of it, we're also in liturgy. We're also at Vespers. We're also saying the prayers, making the sign of the cross. We're actively experiencing the life of the church. And that's the catechism as much as anything, is feeling ourselves, seeing ourselves change, or not actually seeing ourselves change, but like in a very embodied way, going through the change. And it's a gradual, very process, like whole body, whole community sort of thing, way beyond just, I learned some information about the Trinity.
Yeah, that's what's actually actionable. What can someone action out of the infinite set of data that we're able to kind of drop on somebody is, I think, pretty important. It's one thing to tell someone like all of the things of anger management, but another to like be in the moment and like have developed some enough of a presence of mind to just like, okay, breathe. Like when someone is screaming at me or like trying to kill me or doing like whatever the random stuff is, like breathe. All right, how do I attend to like the situation, to this person? Like, all right, what are my emotions that are now just going, the chaos again, right, of the emotions that I start feeling when this interaction is going sideways. I don't remember lectures in those moments.
No, not at all. When you're talking about that, that's reminded me of the gospel story of Jesus and the demoniac, or I guess any of the stories of like Jesus and the demoniac, where, and then I'm imagining this demon-possessed person coming at him with like all of what we'd understand as like de-escalation, dysregulation, like the yelling, the cursing, the foaming at the mouth, like the really abrasive, aggressive gestures, like really scary presentation. And kind of the way that I remember the stories is Jesus having boundaries, and that like he doesn't allow this to persist, continue, but he responds from within the calmness of himself and just like, nope, you have to leave. And he's very present in those moments, not threatening, not attacking, not condemning the person, not diagnosing the person, just like, nope, in the presence of me, who am the fullness of life, like this demon can't exist here, so he has to go.
And it wasn't a lecture. It wasn't this 3-point sermon or anything that it was, he tells the formerly demoniac, right? He's in his right mind and dressed, like, go tell what I did, and all that the Lord has done for you. So he had something that he could do. Yeah, this seems to be this idea now that we've got access to limitless information, that like if I somehow possess all this information that makes me, I don't know, sober. It's not embodied. I know that even in my own spiritual formation, the one of the greatest gifts someone gave me was just a book called "1,000 Gifts," and just keep track of 1,000 things I'm grateful to God for. And so, as I started doing that, I started noticing that like the depression that I was suffering from, just like the cycles were shorter and shorter and shorter. And then I started like learning to look for God in all of my circumstances, right? The scriptures say, rejoice always, pray unceasingly, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. And so the more that I started doing it, and then the more is like, oh, God was here. Oh, God was like, then it like this expectation of seeing God or encountering God in all circumstances started to manifest as well. And I remember, I don't know, I'd been doing it like a year, right? So it's not like a one-off. It's not like I did it like a couple of times, so now like I've got it, right? This was like painful, like recognizing, or I think one of the big breakthroughs for me, was that my depression generally was like this legitimate sadness taken to self-obsession. It was like, I just like this inward looking, I'm caring for myself by obsessing over this thing that I'm sad about, which it didn't work, right? Because it's here, and it was hopeless. But like then when I actually looked beyond or outside of myself and started like seeing like the goodness that's out, like actually out there and around me in these circumstances, particularly how God was present in all circumstances, like radically shifted my whole worldview and the way that I live. And then like a year and a half after I'd done this, like I had all these notebooks, right? Like all these notebooks pile up on this bookshelf. I remember really feeling crushed, like, God, I don't believe you're good. Like I'm having, another one of these kind of little crises. And I was like, God, I don't like, what proof do I even have that you're good? Because like, I don't believe that you're good. And I remember looking up and seeing that bookshelf full of all of these notebooks, and something, I don't know how to explain it. It's like something just switched. And now I know that I'm just convinced. I have this abiding conviction of the goodness of God. And it's like, in whatever circumstances, like the things can only go like so far, then they just hit like a steel wall or something. It's like, nope, because like, oh, here I can kind of just rip off like, oh, I'm really grateful I encountered God in, at lunch, or there's just kind of this embodied, because there's a direction, right? Like I'm moving in the direction of the goodness of God, and that having moved in that direction, like it's harder almost to like go the other way. So like this stuff shows up and it's distracting, but like my capacity to attend to the expectation of God or his goodness in all circumstances is just like stronger, if that makes sense.
I think it does. And if I might riff on where you're talking, I love the story that you tell about the 1,000 gifts in the bookshelf. And what I'm imagining is, in order to fill a whole shelf of journals of gifts, that's weeks, months, years, maybe of journaling. And in order for that to happen, it has to become kind of a practice. Maybe every day. I mean, that's great. But even not every day, but just like kind of regularly, or it's the thing you keep coming back to. Like it's a habit forming thing. Or when it becomes a habit forming thing, that's a really good sign. And here's where I might highlight, I think, another trap that we fall into when we're trying to invite people into change, into a different way of life, is on some level thinking it will happen all at once, or quickly, or on some kind of a timeline. Like real, like actual growth is always going to frustrate any measure, any rubric of like measurable outcomes, which I know that was a big thing back in the agency days. They're all like, billable hours and measurable outcomes and evidence-based practices. And like, you got to check the boxes, and we got to be able to like measure numbers and all of that. Real growth is not numbers. In a way, it can't be measured or charted. In a way, you become aware of changes in yourself over time. Other people become aware of changes over time. But I think it's more in the scope of like months and years, maybe even longer, that you look back and be like, oh, wow, I remember like, 5 years ago, I was a really like angry, mean spirited, like bitter person. Like, actually, I'm not that person anymore. What happened? When did it happen? I don't know, somewhere in the last 5 years of daily practices that set you on a different trajectory. But yeah, I think that's an aspect we need to consider when we're inviting people into change. Is like it's a lifelong transformative process, and it's going to take a long time, like longer than the grant money will last, probably.
Yeah, we used to more intentionally the first like couple of years I was there. I don't know, I haven't heard as many conversations around it, but with our programming tracks, that was something that we used to intentionally pump the brakes on some people moving, like phasing up. It's like, this person's trying to like run their own program and make it happen on their timeline. So like, we need to kind of slow some things down and try to help this person develop an awareness that like, if you go and just read the AA book, it's really not gonna make you sober in that sense. Like you got to work the steps and process this stuff. And it's not something that you get to go do. Well, I did this step 1 today, step 2 tomorrow. So, it's like it's not a 12-day.
No. And on top of that, so I've talked with some people who have been like clean and sober for like, 2-3 decades, and they talk about doing the steps all the way through like every couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not only just like not a one-day thing, but it's not a one-time thing either.
Yeah, my one of my bosses talks about, he's like, every day, I do an inventory and I call my sponsor and we go through this stuff, and it's like, and that's like how he like one of the main, again, like it's community. He's got a web of relationships, but also like how he maintains the sobriety, because he's moving in a direction, and this is like one of those supports, because he recognizes like, all right, there's some stuff that doesn't fit, and I recognize like, I really don't want to be I don't want to be sober today. So like, now what?
Yeah. So, I mean, I love hearing about your boss's story. It's making me think of some of the guys in my group who have expressed some discouragement or some consternation at the thought of like, oh gosh, am I still going to need to be in group in like 20 years? Like, am I still going to need to like be doing these accountability things? Like, do I have to be sober forever? That sort of thing. Or like the question sometimes comes up is like, so when am I done with Rhys's group? And I'm like, I don't know. But I'll often compare it to church, and like, I mean, especially in Orthodox Christianity, where it's liturgical and it's still the divine liturgy of Saint John Chrysostom after 1500 years, still the same liturgy. At some point, I'm not learning information, and yeah, I'm going to go to liturgy every week, twice if it's available. I'm going to go to confession more often than I do, at least once a month, in perpetuity. Not necessarily because I've accrued like that many more sins, although sometimes, but it's because it's like, well, this is the sober life, or this is the Christian life. And in doing these rituals, I am rearranging my inside assumptions to say, yes, I am a Christian. I am a member of the church. Just like doing the daily inventories, checking with the sponsor 30, 40 years into it. Yeah, it's like you're not learning anything more, but you are reinforcing this orientation that you are a sober person now. You're not an acting out person. And that's something that doesn't stick without care. So we care for it every day, like we would feed a child every day.
Yeah, one of the greatest arguments, I didn't have an argument, I guess, with my wife in becoming Orthodox, but one of the questions that I asked her when she was, kind of like, wow, I've been the church, we were going to the church she'd gone to since she was born. And I asked her, it's like, do you see me, have I treated you with more like Christ or less like Christ since I've started going to the liturgy? Like, I wasn't even able to participate in the sacraments. And she's like, oh, like undeniably more, it's like, it was just obvious, right? There was an obvious increase in love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control in my life. And she was experiencing that. She's like, wow, like there's, proof is in the pudding. And it was just, going to liturgy. And I was really, for like, at first, like one of the things that really jumped out to me was how once we get to I think it's the cherub hymn, said it wrong. Yeah, about, we who represent the cherubim now lay aside all earthly cares. And I came into liturgy some days and just internally raging. And by the time I hit that, it's like, oh, wait a minute, like I could give this to God. Like, and like, I cannot think of a single liturgy that I've gone to that by the time I hit that hymn, like I'm distracted, like have internal distractions. Like, it's just like, oh yeah. Or like if I like once popped up, it's like, oh yeah, hey, here you go, God. Like, awesome. Now we know about this. Like, and, but it's cause and I look forward to it. It's like, oh yeah, like at least on Sundays, like I'm excited to go to confession. It's like, all right, hey, like I don't want this stuff. Like, let's give this to God. Or, but it just shapes you in a, it's, yeah, it's a mysterious thing. It's like, I went to this other tradition, and what jumped out to me was in my former tradition is the sermon was the thing, right? And so you could get the spiritual information, and that was not resulting in greater conformity in my life to Christ, that I wasn't doing like a great job of loving my wife or other people. But once I started going to liturgy, like that started shaping me spiritually. And then that has a it's going to manifest itself physically too, like in the way that I just carry myself and treat others.
I love what you said, like spiritual information does not result in greater conformity to the image of Christ. I wrote that down. I liked it so much. Because it's true. And I'll reference a different metaphor. It's like, I could read all of the articles I want about, working out and bodybuilding and trimming the ab fat and everything. But if I never actually do a sit-up or go running or lift a weight, like nothing's actually going to change. I don't become physically healthy by learning about physical health. I have to practice it. And I know I was really loving how you were talking about your experience of the liturgy and coming to the Cherubicum, and by that time being able to lay aside the cares. And I think come to think of it, I often have like kind of a similar experience of like coming in really rushed, and at some point mostly able to like unblend from stuff. Mostly it's a struggle. And just thinking about how, there's a whole lot of spiritual dynamics going on. We're stepping into the kingdom of God, and Christ is there, the saints are there, and it's ineffably, incomprehensibly more than we understand is going on a spiritual level. But on a physical level that we can understand, like it's this process, it's this ritual, it engages all of the senses, it's predictable. I think part of what that does is, as we're in it, we condition ourselves to respond to that. And I step up to the church, I make the sign of the cross, I walk through the narthex into the nave, I venerate the icons, and I'm starting to cue my body and my system for, okay, we're stepping into spiritual mode. We're stepping into seek the inner stillness mode. Mm-hmm. And this whole environment supports that. And as I become familiar with those cues, it becomes a little bit easier every time in response to the cues. And so we need that environment. We need to activate those cues. And I guess that would be the thing that I'd want for a sobriety context also. And I guess this is why I think like coming into like a support group is so very important, is because at least the way that I do my groups, we come into the room, we sit, we make some jokes, we do some breathing, we do some body work, we do a check-in, we have this ritual of, and now we all tell our stories for the week, and then we have our crosstalk, and we conclude with some gratitude, and there's a little bit of a ritual, and sometimes there's snacks. But again, it's this conditioning over time in a really, really embodied sense. So yes, much more than just learning information, but actually engaging your body, engaging your whole system into the process.
Yeah, that reminds me of one of the guys that I had coming out to our thrift store, and we ended up having to have a hard conversation with him because he was talking a big game about like all this kind of stuff, and it's like, I got to give God the praise, or these different things. And one of the things that we were pointing out is like, you can say all this stuff, but until like, like, what does that look like for you to do this? And this guy, he only has one arm and threw away a couch by himself. And one of the things that like we were trying to help him address is like, just because you have a capacity for something doesn't necessarily mean that you ought to do that something. And so it's like I recognize like that's pretty cool that you can like throw this couch away by yourself. But it's like I told you I was going to come and like I would give me like 2 minutes. I was going to go like use the restroom or something, and I'll come and like we'll go throw this couch together. It's like it was like a humility thing that it's like this is what it looks like for you. Like we recognize, like you've got this mindset that you got to work harder, you got to do all this extra kind of stuff. But like one way that you can practice like humility and sobriety for you is let other people participate in things that you are capable of doing. Like that, it's not like a slight against you. It's like, this is normal. This is kind of what it means to be part of the community again. He started doing that. Like there were things that like beforehand he was doing by himself, and then he'd be like, hey, like, can you help me move this? Or hey, can you do that thing? Because like, once my arm is exhausted, like I'm hit, like I can't do anything. And it's like, and if he, when he was running 100 miles an hour, he'd go back to the shelter and pass out. And it's like, what are you going to do when you get home and you got to make your own food, when you launch from here? And so like, he's been doing pretty good since he's left. And I think that like one of the things that it came down to was like him generating and practicing like, all right, this is a way that I can invite people to be part of my recovery, because like if I just do everything by myself, I'm gonna wear myself out and then I won't eat. Like there's like things will start unraveling but we gave him practical, like this is for him. His weakness was an inability to get help. And so it's like, all right, this is what normal ways of getting help that are not like us like looking down on you or trying to discriminate against you because of this disability. And I think about that sometimes, like, oh yeah, like what are like those specific things that like I could be practicing? Like for me, it's gratitude. Like I have to practice gratitude every day, or like I'm just going to be like just trapped in despair. Like if I'm not every day practicing gratitude, like my mental health is hit. Like I'm gone I'm just roasted. So the practicing breathing, like these what are these embodied ways of living that, if we're attending to those almost lower level things, that it kind of helps you move up the hierarchy. What is it? Maslow's hierarchy.
Maslow's hierarchy. Yeah. There's this bracketing of like you need a foundation, a foundation to be well. And often the body is that foundation. Is when the body is well, the mind and the spirit can be well also. There comes a point where that can be inversed, to where the mind and the soul are sufficiently strong to where now the body needs to be challenged to make them stronger. But that's like a lot more advanced. Only monks pay attention to that one for now. Yeah, this idea of inability to ask for or accept as being a weakness, I think is really powerful. And like what you talked about, letting other people participate in what you already know how to do would require a lot of humility, but could result in a lot of connection as well. The image that came into my head was when I'm in the kitchen and one of my sons wants to do it with me. And like at this point, like my 9-year-old could actually be like, well, actually, so I have a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. And we try to keep the 2-year-old out of the kitchen. but the older two, they're getting to where they, with appropriate tasks and structuring, they can be helpful, and it's a little bit more of a collaboration as they're getting a little bit older. So that's really nice. There's definitely this period where having them in the kitchen was decidedly unhelpful, but really empowering and really connective for them. And so now, now I run into these situations where yes, I am perfectly capable of preparing a whole meal by myself, and it might actually be faster if I do it by myself. But if I invite my 5-year-old to wash his hands, put on an apron, pull up the step stool, and do some stuff, then sure, the meal might take a little longer to make, but we'll have had that connection. We'll have had that memory. And I get to let go of some control and some perfectionism, and that's good for me. And he gets some practice in safely using a knife, and that's good for him. So
yeah, and that's the tension that's really hard to embody, right, or to live in. Of And I run into this every day. And some days I don't do a great job of like staying in attention. I just kind of like, nope, I'm going to do this. But right, I've got all these participants who come out and don't really know how to do the tasks that are asked of them at like these different responsibilities that are given to the participants while they're at the thrift store, right? So sorting clothes, like if you're not checking all of the pockets and then we sell something with a huge hole, like that's a problem. And so there's this tension of like, all right, how am I, is it a need or is it a preference on some of this stuff? Like we need like what margin of error is acceptable in this, right? Like in teaching a kid to, like you said, using a knife safely, like that's, and we still were able to eat food. It might not have been done as fast or like kind of it wasn't made the way that maybe I wanted it to make, but like if I can let go of some of that control and live in the tension of like, yeah, this just wasn't that good, but hey, like there's this person was empowered. Like that's like, all right, when and that's the moment by moment stuff that's hard to figure out. Like, all right, do I had an autistic kid come out one time. We're like sorting through these jeans and like checking the pockets for holes and the stuff. And he was paid attention for like 5 minutes. And then he was like doing this other stuff. And I was like, all right, what is it? How? I'm not going to make this kid get back on the table and sort these jeans. So like, what can I do? Like, what can we give him to do? So I was like, oh, what if I give him the ones that have already been sorted? Because he was overwhelmed, right? He's like, there's too many things that like, there's too many places where it could have problems. It's like you could see he's just getting overwhelmed. And so I was like, all right, what if I give him the jeans and tell him, all right, hey, this one's good, this one's bad, or this one needs to go into like, we're going to keep it and hand it out downtown. And so like, how do there's no like, this is it for every single person. And it just kind of like changes like in over, the 30 minutes to 40 minutes. Like, how am I empowering him? How am I maintaining this conversation? What's, because some of the pants he sorted, just, I'm going to hear about it. Like, I know we're going to get a return from these pants that had a hole in them that didn't get caught. And it's like, yep.
Yeah, again, thinking about these traps we can fall into as we're inviting people to change. There's definitely this trap of thinking that it's going to be a solitary process, or it can be a solitary process, or I'll change just me by my lonesome, or I can send you away to go do your change on your own without attending and attuning and connecting you to people. And like you're talking about too, if I think there's one way to change, or if I can just like set a change process and walk away from it, or that I can invite two people into the same change process, like that's not going to work either, because like you're saying, everybody has different needs, different capabilities, different destinies. So we really have to be connected. We really have to be flexible. We really need to be embodied. We really need to be, doing whatever we do daily over a long period of time. And all of that together is needed to create any sort of lasting change, whether it's I'm growing in my faith, I'm growing in my sobriety, I'm maintaining my housing, I'm building muscle or losing weight or whatever. Those are the components, I think. Those are the ingredients.
Yeah. As a Christian, I think it comes back to love, which isn't static. It's in motion, and the motion is hard because it flows differently, daily, and that can kind of be overwhelming because I have days that I can't see it, some days when I don't want to see it, some days when I'd rather avoid it, and I not always faithful to expressing the love of God in Christ to all of my neighbors. And I got really crushed by my lapses in love, which I got wrote up over it. Like I threw away. So one of the fascinating things in working with the homeless is, they've got most of their possessions in a bag, right? And that can be pretty crushing. It's like, wow, this person lives in material poverty, and then they just leave this stuff everywhere, right? There's kind of like this. It offends our sense of self responsibility. Like, what do you mean? Like, that's all you've got, and that, like that. How can your world, like your world, be disposable? But it's a problem for us because if we just let anybody leave all of their bags in our cafeteria, then it stinks. And there's, cockroaches and like this, you can't leave. Like we serve meals to like, we have 200 some people men staying in our shelter, and we serve the general community. So we do like 1,600 meals a month, I think. And so if we let 200-300 people leave all their stuff in our cafeteria, nobody would fit in the cafeteria. So like there was this guy every day just left his stuff there, and I told him, so I was like, listen, man, like we're gonna throw your stuff away, like, kind of went through this whole thing, but I didn't like document it. So the day that I finally was like, all right, I've had enough, I'm putting my foot down, like this is it, right? I went and pitched all his stuff, and at one point he like it seemed like he was leaving, and so I was like, okay, like I checked, and it's like, all right, I think he's gone, I'm just throwing his stuff away, like this is it. Not condoning my actions. Turned out he had a $15,000 check in one of those bags. And like, I remember I opened up like two of them. One of them was just stacked with Bibles or something, and the other one was just clothes. I was like, nope, threw them all in the dumpster. And then he like went and, reported me to my supervisor. And it turned out, sure enough, he had this inheritance check from like the 90s in one of those bags and just had never cashed it because it was from like a couple cities over. And he had like walked here however many years ago. And I was hit, right? Like that was a break like on me. And so in processing that, in trying to come to terms with, all right, how did I get to this point where, I was doing harm, like kind of objectively did harm to this guy, even though maybe in the moment I thought I was doing what was right. I was meditating on this question, like, all right, this was a lapse in love. All right. So I ended up, one of the things I did was I kind of like was meditating on 1 Corinthians 13 and rewrote it from the perspective of like a frontline worker or like, a care worker. And so if you're open to it, I'll read it. I really found it reframed just my whole perspective on like love within kind of social work, or specifically like at the homeless shelter looked like.
I'd love to hear that, and I think that might be a good like wrap point for us to come back to, like, what does it mean to be loving, to be present. But yeah, I'd love to hear that.
Okay, if I speak the language of the homeless and of clinicians, but do not have love, I am only the sound of chaos. If I share Jesus with power and understand all the drama, addiction, and illness, and if I have a heart as big as the sea, but do not have love, I am not justified. If I give 490 pair of socks and underwear out, swat rocks from the air, or prevent a suicide, if I don't have love, I've gotten nowhere. Love is patient. Love is compassionate. It is not offended. It is not defensive. It is not punitive. It is not enabling. It is not disrespectful. It does not demand reciprocity. Love does not relate in terms of wrongs, does not delight in any form of relapse or ineligible flags, but rejoices with progress, always empathizes, identifies needs, always hopes, always pursues relationship. Love never gives up. But the clinical diagnoses will change. The codes of the streets will dissipate. The drama will pass away. For I diagnose incompletely, and I hustle incompletely. But when the complete manifests, the incomplete disappears. When I was a private citizen, I talked, I thought, I reasoned like a private citizen. When I became staff, I submitted to the employee handbook. For the time being, we see only the tip of the iceberg. Then I will see everything. For the time being, I only know just a snatch of the story. Then I will know the whole narrative, even as my story is fully known. Until then, faithfulness, hope, and love sustain life. But the greatest of these three is love.
I have appreciated this ramble and exploration, and I hope some of the ideas might be useful to the listener, at least as starting points of more conversation and maybe a closer examination of how we support people, how we invite people into change, how we ourselves pursue our own growth and healing and change as much more than just this intellectual process or this singular change point, but this whole life process, this transformative way of being that encompasses our whole lives. And if it encompasses our life, it can begin to encompass the worlds around us. I come back to this quote from Saint Seraphim of Sarov, acquire the inner stillness, acquire your own inner peace, and 1,000 around you will be saved. On that note, we'll close for here. But Ben, if a listener wanted to reach out to you, other than the Lord of Spirits Facebook page, how can someone find you in the world or on the internet?
Oh man, I suppose I should just give out my email address because I don't have social. Because I in college just wasted hours and hours, and I was like, this is not like I am not doing anything with my life. So yeah, I guess if someone wanted to email me, that I'd be totally down for a conversation. I think that's how we originally connected as well. My email address is BENDKLIM as in Mary, EK @gmail.com. So it's Ben D Klimek @gmail.com. Yeah, if I see an email in there, I'd totally be down to respond. And because I'm trying to learn how to even share what I'm learning, or some of the stuff that I've encountered working at the shelter, and don't have any platform. This is my first step, I guess.
Cool. I'm glad to offer that, and I hope it's worthwhile. But yeah, thank you for your time and your story and your presence here with us. It's been really great. Thank you, listener, for following along. If this is helpful to you, please like and review and share the show around. You can visit us at patreon.com/outer circle. Support us financially. That's helpful as well. But yes, definitely, the rate and the review, share us around, all the standard podcasting things is helpful. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. And may you have peaceful days that veer toward greater and greater order and connection and balance and all that you do.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Rhys. And I always joke with my wife, there's always an opportunity to quote Rich Mullins. So I'll say my little bit of it's be present, but Rich always said be God's. And if you're being God's, like it's kind of hard to get off the track. So thanks for having me on again. This is great. I love talking to you. And please support the podcast. I listen to it, and it's been helpful for me in reframing and trying to think about how am I approaching this, and outside of even kind of the waters of northeast Indiana. So part of this bigger community. So thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks so much. Thank you for joining me in today's conversation. My name is Rhys Pasimio. I'm an Eastern Orthodox Christian and a clinical counselor with specialties in substance use, compulsive behaviors, sexuality, and trauma. You can reach me through newpatterncounseling.com. This episode was mastered by Breakfast Puppies. Theme music is by Titus Lockard. Please like, rate, review, and share this podcast from all your favorite platforms. Please also consider showing your support of this work through contributing dollars through the podcast page at patreon.com/outer circle. Thank you, and see you next time.